Hey guys, and welcome to the episode of A Healthy Dose of Fran. Today the Avatar returns in something that, it was probably about time I was going to get to it, because today I am talking about the war in Ba Sing Se.
There's no war in Ba Sing Se.
Sorry, there is no war in Ba Sing Se. And if you can't tell, yes, I'm talking about propaganda today in the Avatar universe. So, let's get to it. Now, there is propaganda pretty much everywhere. We've had it in our time, we've had it in fictional times, it's here on my channel. And the most interesting thing is the fact that it is in both Avatar The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra, and a little bit in Rise of Kyoshi as well. But propaganda in the series for the 100-Year War and the Fire Nation was probably one of the most interesting parts and explorations of propaganda in the show, at least for me. Now, the other cases with like Amon, for example, using propaganda images to boost the equalist nation, and Zahir with his speeches for individualism, and all these sort of things that we see in the other series are just as interesting in terms of more subtle uses of propaganda. But the Fire Nation is probably one of the most interesting because of the different kinds of propaganda that are used throughout the 100-Year War that we see subtly and quite obviously in Avatar The Last Airbender throughout the whole of the series. And so that's why I want to explore a bit of it today, particularly on the bits that kind of slightly represent what happens in our time as well, because who doesn't love making a joke about the terrifying use of propaganda in the modern day world? Not me, because why would I want to use propaganda on my YouTube channel? Now, propaganda in the Fire Nation was ripe, to the point that Fire Nation soldiers even make jokes about Fire Nation propaganda in relation to the Avatar. I can't remember the episode, I think it may be the Blue Spirit, but I don't remember exactly. But to the point that they are making jokes about it, it makes this awareness of propaganda quite frightening, that they are aware of it, but maybe not to the extent of how much propaganda is used in their nation. Now, there are subtle uses that have been brought up by a fantastic Tumblr user called Avatar Symbolism, I think it is. I don't know if that's still the name. Where such things as perspectives and stereotypes of different nations were used to make the Fire Nation feel more superior, such as in relation to the Earth Kingdom, which obviously was the Fire Nation's biggest threat. And the way in which they combated the fear of the Earth Kingdom and just generally the might of the Fire Nation was through fetishization and sexualization of the Earth Kingdom female citizens. And we can actually see this in two different occasions. One, when we see the flashback in Zuko Alone of Azula burning this fashionable doll of an Earth Kingdom female citizen who is dressed in what I can only describe as what white people like myself in colonization times would have used to make dolls of when we were conquering people during the British Empire and a horrific period in history, all that stuff. But that would have been something that ourselves would have done during that time, the fetishization of the exotic through traditional dress and stuff like that. And we see that in that moment. We then also have the moment that Ozai's angels meet the Kyoshi warriors. And one of the first things that Ty Lee says is, "You're not prettier than us," which is never brought up into discussion, which is where this idea of fetishization came about towards Earth Kingdom citizens and Earth Kingdom females, because it gives this exotic feel to the Fire Nation towards this nation. And that is a subtle usage that I myself didn't even realise until Avatar Symbolism brought it up, but it's a really interesting use of propaganda. The other is the more obvious kind, which we see in the episode The Headband in Book 3, Fire of The Last Airbender, where Aang is at a Fire Nation school and is learning about the history, such as the fact that Fire Lord Sozin, whether it be himself or the fact that it was just passed down sort of as people refer to Chinese whispers, and it just changed over time, that the Air Nation had an army, and Fire Lord Sozin's tactics helped them defeat this army and destroy the Air Nomads. And of course, as we know, the Air Nomads are a peaceful nation. They didn't have an army. Fire Lord Sozin, as Aang says, defeated them by ambush. And the shock and disgust of the classmates shows that the propaganda and the dissemination of knowledge has been controlled from the very top, to the point that saying something like that would be considered appalling. Like, I'm surprised like he only got told off with like a small warning if propaganda is so deep in the core of the Fire Nation. And this is another thing, the dissemination of knowledge is a big thing that I noticed a lot to do with the Fire Nation. And the one example, well, there are two really, but this is the one that I really want to focus on, and this is in the episode of The Storm, when we learn the origin of how Zuko got his scar, and the images that we have of this Agni Kai with his father. Not a single person there, from what we recognise of people, were of lower ranks, were general citizens. They were nobles, they were admirals, they were generals, they were people of high standing who would have information and have this power and just all the things that the Fire Nation is all about, and they would have this knowledge. But as we heard from the crew, they'd all heard that he had gotten it, or they'd assumed he'd gotten it in a training match. They had no idea that the scar that their prince had received was from their Fire Lord, which is going to change their perspective as a whole, or at least it should have, of their leader. But it also shows that dissemination of knowledge is controlled by those in power, which is something that is an incredibly smart way to make sure that your propaganda and power stays in the way in which you need it to be powerful. It's like they say, those with knowledge and power are the ones who decide the fate of the world. And that's how the Fire Nation worked. Every bit of knowledge came from the top. Another is based on the technological advancements and intelligence of the Fire Nation, which, although true in the majority of forms, as we see in the Northern Air Temple episode with the Inventor, it's not completely true, because non-Fire Nation citizens, from the sounds of it, created the majority of the weapons for the Fire Nation. In the Fire Nation, individualism is basically squashed out. Everyone is a carbon copy of everyone else, because that is the way to keep order. So the intelligence and the creativity to make these things isn't there. So they take non-Fire Nation people to design these weapons and use the Fire Nation resources to create them and use it to their advantage. But is that passed on to the public? Of course it's not. It's propaganda. And so the Fire Nation is still considered one of the most technologically advanced and industrially advanced nations in the world, even though most of the things that they created, they didn't create. The use of propaganda in the Fire Nation was one of the most interesting things in Avatar, alongside pretty much everything else to do with Avatar. And while it does continue in Legend of Korra and Rise of Kyoshi, the Fire Nation's use was probably one of the most interesting parts to me because of the different kinds, the subtle propaganda, the very clear use of it, and just generally the fact that Fire Lord Sozin thought it'd be okay to be like, yeah, we'll just say they had an army and I'm sure it'll be fine, and apparently it was. But yeah, Fire Nation propaganda. Who would have thought it would work for 100 years? But what do you guys think? What did you think was the most interesting part of propaganda for the Fire Nation? And is there any bit of propaganda you think I missed in my discussion? Whatever the case, let me know in the comment section down below. Now, I may not use propaganda in my videos, but I want to say thank you so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you go to the description box down below, you'll find all the links to my social media, where you definitely have to follow me on. You'll also find my merchandise, which you should 100% buy, and my Patreon, where you need to sign up and become a patron. And if you aren't already subscribed, which, why aren't you subscribed? Do that now and hit the notification bell and the thumbs up, because your leader commands it. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. And I better see you guys next time.